Hi, Peter Jones, author, property investor, ex-chartered surveyor, and I'm doing something a little bit different today because I'm making this video in my home office. I don't usually do that, but under the circumstances I think it's only right and prudent to follow the government advice and not be out and about. Apparently it's going to make a difference, so if I can make a small difference to bring this thing to an end, then I will. And so I'll do my recording here today. And I just wanted to share my thoughts on what's happening. Not that I'm a medical expert, not that I'm a financial expert or an economic expert, but I suppose I've been through a few crises and I try and keep an eye on what's happening. And I've noticed there's been a lot of sort of quite excited chatter on Facebook, which ranges from this is not a real problem and it's all made up by the government. The argument is usually a conspiracy theory that it's to distract us from Brexit. Well, I have to say this is the most expensive distraction that's ever been created, so I don't go with that at all. Through to, as property investors, this is an amazing time to be alive and we're going to have a fantastic opportunity. And that is true, but my own thoughts are it's probably far too early in the day to be saying that, because an awful lot of stuff is going to happen, and let's be honest, some bad stuff is going to happen to some good people, and we're not at the stage yet where we can actually sort of come out, dust ourselves down and pick ourselves up. And for the time being, personally, I'm not getting overexcited about opportunity. I want to help people come through this, and so I just want to give some thoughts. For what it's worth, like I say, it sounds almost arrogant as I say it to say I'm going to tell you what I think. I will tell you what I think. You don't have to agree, you can disagree, but this is just how I see it. So this week has been weird. Last week was almost normal. We knew that something was going to happen. We've been watching what's been happening in China and Italy and Iran and other places, and other countries have been suffering perhaps more than we have, and then suddenly this week it kind of all happened. I noticed over the weekend I was watching the news and I was tuning into the BBC news website regularly over the weekend, and I could see that the pace of things was changing very, very quickly. Now, last week, it seems like a million years ago, but we had the budget and we had the coronavirus budget, and everybody was amazed at the amount that Rishi Sunak was actually chucking out there in terms of money into the economy, but he knew what was coming. We also had the interest rate cut from the Bank of England. Roll on just a week, and what have we got? Well, we've got the government asking us to stay at home. We've got another interest rate cut down to the lowest level that it's ever been in history. And we've also had the government getting the chequebook out and writing even more cheques. The reason being that this is a massive economic shock. Again, I've seen chatter on Facebook saying things like, this isn't as serious as 2008 because 2008 was a banking crisis. Respectfully, I disagree. This is a whole economy crisis. It's not just the banking crisis. At least in 2007, 2008, it was kind of like ring-fenced around the banks and the government could bail the banks out, and there was a knock-on effect into the economy. And that was bad enough. But this is a shock to the economy where basically commerce, trade, activity is grinding to a halt. And it has to grind to a halt in order to stop the spread of the virus. And we've already seen a lot of people are very worried about their jobs. The hospitality business has taken a massive hit, and the UK economy is largely based upon two main industries, the financial services and the hospitality/services sector. The services sector makes a massive part of our economy, and it's been hit. And the government can see that unless they actually get the chequebook out and spend a lot of money to basically try and keep us in the position that we were in when this crisis started, that there's not going to be very much activity to come back to when this is all over. So that's very interesting. We've just been through 10, 12 years of austerity, and I suppose the cynic might say, well, what was the point of all of that? Because the government have now spent, and the figures are quite staggering, that they've now spent more money dealing with coronavirus in a week than they spent in the whole time dealing with the banking crisis, apparently. So there we are. This is just to put it into a sort of a scale. Just think about this. Yesterday, the Bank of England announced that they were cutting interest rates to 0.1%, which is just crazy. Basically trying to get rid of as much of the cost as they can for us to help us to get through this. But they also introduced, and nobody's really talking about this, they also introduced £200 billion worth of quantitative easing. Again, in the credit crunch, I think quantitative easing got up to about, they started off with about 60 billion, and they put it out into the economy in dribs and drabs. This 200 billion, they want it out there, and they're trying to find ways to get it out into the economy as quickly as possible. This is the scale of the problem as they see it, because everybody is going to have to stop work to some extent or other. We might be able to work from home, that's great, but for a lot of people that's not practical, it's not feasible. A lot of people are going to be laid off, small businesses are going to stop, and if small businesses stop, they may not survive. And then when it's all over, there may not be a job for people to go back to, and this is what their worry is. And this is why we're in completely unprecedented times. How long is it going to last? Well, yesterday Boris was saying that we can get this thing beat in 12 weeks. Now, I was watching the live broadcast, and I think that we need to be a bit careful about how that might be interpreted for us by people who didn't watch the broadcast. He didn't say that it was going to disappear in 12 weeks. He basically said, if we work together and if we all do what the government say, which is basically staying at home, social isolation, all that kind of stuff, not going to the pub, not going out unless we really have to, then we might get to the point where it's more under control in 12 weeks, is really what he was saying. But this could go on for how long could this go on? Well, we don't know. Nobody's ever dealt with a pandemic like this in our lifetime. We've got no idea how long this is going to take. And of course, the thing is, it's not like the virus is actually just going to disappear. I don't want to be gloomy about this, but even with all of our self-isolation, it might stop the spreading, but at some point we've all got to come back out again. And when we come back out again, then there's the risk that we then catch it. So I imagine that at some point we will come out in batches. They're talking about having the test to see who's got the antibodies, to see who's already immune to it. Well, presumably those people will come out first. Then there'll be people coming out who haven't got the antibody, and then we'll have to see whether they catch it or not. And that the facilities will need to be there to help them and to protect them. So all of this stuff needs to be worked through. So if you're wondering, when are we going to get back to normal? I would say, well, what is your definition of normal? My suspicion is that the world has changed forever. If only because when we do get through this, as we will, governments of the world are going to be so financially indebted paying for it, they're going to have to work out how they're going to deal with that. Maybe we need a new economic system. Maybe there'll be some kind of an economic reset. Maybe the G7 and the G20 will get together and write off debts. Maybe there'll be a whole way new of doing things. I don't know. But what I do know is that if we thought austerity was bad last time round, governments of the world are going to have to deal with even bigger debts now, and they're going to have to decide how they do that. And politically, does the population of all the different countries that make up the world actually have the appetite for even more austerity? Probably not. So what are they going to do about that? What's going to happen about ownership? What's going to happen to all of the loans which the government are going to give us to get through? Are they going to keep them in place, or are they going to write them off? We don't know. Really interesting times that we're in. So I suppose because I'm the property teacher and my blog and my vlog are mainly about property, I ought to just say, well, what's going to happen to property? Well, my assumption is that because basically commerce and trade and business activity as we know it is slowing down, it may not have stopped completely, but it's a massive great slowdown. I'm assuming that the economy is going to be in recession by now, even if the figures don't show it yet, and there's always a time lag, but I'm guessing that's the case. It's a pretty reasonable assumption, in which case there's going to be a knock-on effect and the property market is probably going to be suffering. Apart from anything else, I mean, from a practical point of view, I've read that estate agents, for example, are finding it hard to arrange viewings. I mean, people just aren't interested. We're trying to deal with this disease. People don't want strangers coming round to see their house. By the same token, people don't want to go round to strangers' houses. It's just going to stop. The whole thing is just going to stop. I've got a few plans. I had a few plans this year. Up until last week, I had plans that I was enacting. I was refinancing a few properties. I was going to do this, I was going to do that. Well, my refinancing plans, I'm assuming, are just going to grind to a halt. Although my mortgage broker hasn't told me yet, but are the bank really going to be in a position to deal with it? At some point, are valuers going to go out to houses? Are people going to let valuers in? All of this kind of stuff is probably going to stop, and we're just going to be treading water for a few months. So I don't know. So there is no, as far as I'm concerned, there is no normal. And we're not going back to whatever normal is. And there's never been a normal. There wasn't even a normal after the credit crunch. It kind of felt a little bit the same, but actually things were slightly different, and the way we were doing things was slightly different. This is probably going to be more pronounced. But what it means in practice, I've got no clue. How can I know? But all I'm saying is I don't think we should just assume that in 3 months' time it'll all be over. we'll just go back to how we were doing things and it's all going to be fine. Things are going to be fine because we're going to make them fine, and a lot of that comes down to mindset, and it comes down to how you see things, but it's not going to be how it was. Which is why, at the moment, I don't want to get into all of this, well, it's an amazing opportunity, you know, when we come out of this, there's going to be all these bargains to buy. Because the reality is, over the next few months, people are going to die. Sad, but true. And people are going to lose their savings. And people are going to lose their jobs, and people are going to lose their businesses. And at the moment, to be honest, I'm not feeling very triumphalistic about that. I'm not feeling like, oh yeah, this is an amazing opportunity. Actually, for some people, this is literally the end. And I think that is really, really sad. I mean, hopefully not too many, and hopefully because of what the government are doing, that they've drastically reduced what could have been an unprecedented catastrophe in terms of death rates. If you believe the figures, they're saying that because they've asked us to stay at home, they've reduced the potential number of deaths from something like 250,000 down to about 20,000. Well, 20,000 is still a lot of people, and they're going to be people who we know and people who we love. Apart from the people who are directly affected by the virus in that way, of course, all of the little businesses that are struggling, all of the people who've lost their jobs, and many people have already been told that they're not required, or they're not required for the next 3 or 4 months, and they're wondering how they're going to pay their bills. So for me, this isn't really a time for thinking, right, how do I make the most of this? There will be time enough for that when we get through this, but in the meantime, we just need to do some basic things. First of all, we need to keep ourselves healthy. So although the government guidelines might seem a bit OTT, and by the way, I suspect we haven't actually got to the end of this yet. My own suspicion is that more rigorous enforcement of isolation will come in over the next week or two, particularly if it looks like the figures, the number of people getting the disease is going up too rapidly. So that could happen, but I would just do it. I mean, I see loads of people saying, oh, this is rubbish, I'm going out anyway. Well, don't, because even if you think you can't get it, and the chances are you can get it, there's this fallacy out there that young people can't get it, or it doesn't really matter if young people get it. Yeah, you might be able to cope with it better than older people, but the thing is that you could spread it to older people. So there's that whole issue. So keep yourself safe, keep your family safe. Preserve your cash as far as you can. Whatever you can do, just think about, I don't want to sort of make it even worse in terms of the economy and people not spending and causing a recession, but you've got to look after yourself. So look after your cash. If the government are offering help, make sure that you get in line to apply for it and use it, because you need it. They know you need it. That's why they're offering it. They want you to survive this financially. Look after your business. Think about things that you can do to help your business. And if we all do that, then we can all get through the other side, and then we can start thinking about actually how do we put it all back together again, and what does that mean for us individually. Now, I don't want to sound sanctimonious, and I realise that actually even as I was listening to myself then, I might have sounded a bit sanctimonious. That wasn't the point of this. I just want to really, I don't know, just give my thoughts and encourage you that we will come through this. As far as I know, not that I'm an expert in this, like I say, who is an expert? Who's been through a pandemic before? We just don't know. But look after yourselves, and when we come through, then we can start thinking about what we actually do with the whole situation. And from time to time, I'll try and keep my weekly newsletters going, and I'll give you some thoughts and maybe some updates and some help. I'll actually put in my newsletter this week, I'll copy in a couple of articles which I've got off the internet, which show how to apply for government help, by the way. And this is ever changing. I'm sure that more help will be available. There's talk this afternoon that the Chancellor is going to be announcing that the government are going to help to underwrite salaries and wages. Massive, massive. The bill for that, absolutely massive. Who's going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? Well, their view is, let's not worry about that now. Let's just make sure we get through this and we'll pay for it in the future. But all this stuff will need to be thought about. But if it's there, you need and it affects you, then you need to be applying for that and make sure that you get the help. And so I'm going to put a couple of articles in, which one of them is about how to apply for the help, although it's early days yet and I'm not sure that anybody really knows. And another article which is very interesting about what the Bank of England did yesterday and the fact that it's actually probably one of the most significant things that's ever happened in our financial history. So anyway, until next time.